Bonjour, welcome. We'll be starting in the next minute here. Hopefully everyone has their webinar on mute. Okay, I think all the presenters are ready, so let's get going. Bonjour, welcome to this Telfer Forum. My name is Colin Burrell, Director of Alumni Engagement and Community Partnerships at the Telfer School of Management. These Telfer Forums are a series of events created to engage the community in an interactive discussion on topics that are relevant to Canadians. Over the following weeks, the Telfer School of Management will be hosting a special webinar series called Working Through the COVID-19 Crisis, Managing in the New Normal. This series of webinars is designed to support our alumni community, the business community in general, in navigating the current COVID-19 crisis. Now, this is the first webinar in the series and our first webinar using this platform. So please bear with us and hope you have a great time. Now, I'll just begin. As many of us are in Ottawa with an Indigenous affirmation, we pay respect for the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in the region and from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders past, present, and future. Now, before I formally introduce you to the moderator today, I'd like to say a few things about the webinar. So please note, we will be conducting this in English only. It will also be recorded and emailed to all the participants in a few days' time. Now, again, I just ask that everyone remain muted during the presentation, but please feel free to use the chat function as part of the software here to react to other messages and enter your thoughts. We have two chat moderators, Lynn Sauvage and Anne-Jolie Houle, who will help keep the conversation going. You can also use the chat feature during the webinar to send in any questions you have for the Q&A portion after the panel. So, and then I will be collecting those questions and sending them to our moderator. Now, speaking of the moderator, I'd like to introduce you to Justine Hendricks. She's the Senior Vice President of Sustainable Business and Enablement at EDC, Export Development Canada. She's also an MBA grad of Telfer, and in 2017, she received the Telfer School of Management's Trudeau Medal Award, which is the highest honor awarded to our alumni at the school. So, Justine, over to you, moderator.
Merci, Colin. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, fellow alumni. I guess if we would have done this webinar a bit earlier today, I would have almost started it off by season's greetings. Don't know if many folks saw some of the snowflakes coming down, but we even had a bit of accumulation here, but glad to see that the sun is shining upon us as we start this webinar. I'm really honored to spend the next hour with all of you, along with Nick and Dr. Jaskiewicz, really to talk about some of the challenges for businesses from what's been an unforeseen pandemic, and also focus on some of the other opportunities that it can bring to us as well. Success, hopefully, over the next hour with the support of Colin and the team, is really to engage and have a frank dialogue on some of the realities of this critical time. And hopefully we can ensure that we can assist you in finding the right resources, tackling the right questions, and engaging in the best activities to set you and your businesses onto a successful path. The Canadian economic situation, to probably all of us, seems pretty grim these days. I have to say, I can't recall a point in time where we've seen kind of economic challenges and social welfare being so much in contrast to each other, so intertwined with each other, which is making decision-making in this time of crisis particularly challenging. And we hear about it on a day-to-day basis. But if you take a moment and contrast what's going on in the world today and how it's impacting Canada, and if you look at the reactions to the 2008-2009 crisis, whereby back then it took our government several months in 2008 to rally to really understand what was going on and to bring forward some solution to Canadian specific sectors or different businesses. Compare it to today, where within just a few weeks, the government's been looking to rally to really offer some relief packages. So as an example, in the first 30 days of the crisis, we heard of the announcement of a $105 billion package in order to be able to support Canadians. And week over week, we've been seeing an increase in some of those supports, and I'll speak to a couple of them where EDC's played a role in the next couple of minutes. At EDC, I can share with you that personally and the corporation overall, we've been at the heart of much of the government's action, particularly around the building and deployment of some of these key programs. And I must tell you, from a personal note, I have never seen the amount of enthusiasm and energy and effort put towards trying to get the solutions that the market needs, regardless of the size of business, in a quick manner and a simple way, so that we can really be supporting the Canadian economy in these difficult times. At EDC, our mandate, which is mainly around exporting Canadian companies and their relevant Canadian supply chains, has now been expanded to domestic businesses. The last time that happened was back in 2008 and 2009, and I believe it was after several months of the crisis had begun. And this time around, it happened within the first 4 weeks. And that's a big sign to certainly us at EDC, and giving us the ability, along with our sister Crown BDC, to come up with the right solution so we can help bridge the gap and bring some liquidity to some of our Canadian businesses. How have we reacted at EDC? So similar to Telfer, we've put together some different webinars. We've certainly been very active as a voice within the banking community and also within government to help best identify how to respond to some of the liquidity gaps in Canada. And I can tell you from experience, having seen it with my own team, that we've been very quick to evolve some of the solutions we brought forward as we get a better understanding of their effectiveness in the market towards needing to bridge the gap that we have today. So a few of the examples, when we take a look at what EDC's done within our own product suite, we've been able to, through our financing solutions and our insurance solutions, offer some short-term remedies, whether it's a deferral of payments, similar to some of the deferral programs that you've seen at the bank. We've also waived the waiting period for claims under our export policies. These are just a few of the examples that we've quickly put in place so that we could be of support to the exporting community in terms of liquidity needs. A program that's certainly near to my team has been what we've called the BCab guarantee. It's a program that the government announced a support of up to $20 billion. And effectively what we've done is we've partnered with the Canadian financial institutions in offering and leveraging our guarantee solution and applying a new approach for cash flow and term loans to help Canadian businesses in this time of crisis. And what you see in front of us is perhaps the most recent announcement we've seen by government, the CEBA program, which has been aimed towards small and micro businesses to provide them with some much needed short-term cash flow, as many of them remain closed. And in an effort to be able to show the business community and support the business community. To give you an example, the CEBA program, as we call it, EDC was fairly instrumental in pulling it together, and it was pulled together in about a week and a half. And just earlier this week, Geneviève, if I can ask you to perhaps send to the next slide, we've deployed support to over 313 businesses that support of 40,000. And we've also transferred over $12.5 billion of support for a program that has total availability of 40,000, and that's within the first few days of its inception and implementation in the marketplace. So hopefully this gives you an example or an idea of some of the solutions that we've put at EDC. The idea here, and certainly my curiosity to hear from all of you, is when you look around in terms of the different programs that are in there, recognizing the critical situation that we're in right now, are these the right solutions to help you and your businesses weather the storm? And if you are experiencing some gaps, I'll be really eager to hear about what they may be. And I can certainly attest to you that we're actively working on an ongoing basis with a real open mind to be very responsive to what the needs are in the Canadian marketplace, with a goal to help support the economy and to get us to better pastures. So with that, I'll stop there and perhaps invite my co-partner, Nick Quain, who I understand will walk us through some good lessons learned and examples as to what can be done in this time of a struggle. And reminding folks as I turn it over to Nick that through this webinar, we'll also make sure that we make available some specific pages where you can gather more information and to make sure that you have the most recent information in terms of what solutions are available to you. So with that, Nick, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Justine. So excited to be here, everybody. I'm really going to run through pretty quickly just 3 general ideas here today. On a daily basis, I'm dealing with business owners, executives, founders of tech and non-tech companies, and these are some of the quick things that we're talking about right now. So first off is I'm going to talk a little bit about survival. I mean, it goes without saying that there's been a lot of immediate impacts to revenue and other factors for companies, and they have to first figure out how to survive. So some quick tips on that. The second one is how to respond. So thinking about in the medium term. We're going to be still within this sort of state of flux for a period of time. So once you sort of figured out how to survive in the months ahead, what are some of the things to do and to think about in terms of your activities to adjust to business in a very different environment? And finally, strategize. So this is a bit more the longer term. So when we come out on the other side of this, and we're in a bit of a new normal, because even I think most people agree that we're not going to completely go back to the way things were a month ago. What's different now for your business, and what are some of the things you can strategize in the months ahead so that you're able to hit the ground running on the other side? So, okay, so first up, survive. So this is one of the first things I taught my kids about walking through the parking lot. The first rule is survive. And it goes the same with a business, right? Sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs of a business. You need to survive first and foremost. So, for the first thing we talk about is your team, right? So, obviously there's cash flow and there's other factors, but this event is unique in that, people are being forced to work from home, or if they're not being forced to work from home, they're working perhaps somewhat in harm's way. So as for a business owner, you have an extra layer of responsibility before anything happens to make sure that your staff are in good position. They're safe, obviously, and you're cognizant of what their personal circumstances are with children at home, and obviously unprecedented of not having schools and daycare. And then it's really about communicating with them constantly. It's amazing. Even we found within our organization, we communicate quite well. How many people are wondering things that we thought they understood already? So we have to re-communicate constantly. And I also think it's really important to be transparent. Listen, I mean, as a business leader, you want to put on the best face and you want to give people confidence, but you also have to be transparent. If your business is in a real challenging situation, you need to be upfront with your staff about that. Second thing is to engage your customers. So, it's challenging right now, obviously, to understand what your revenue stream is going forward. One of the best ways you can do that is reach out to some of your best customers, the customers you have the best relationships with, and start to have some conversations with them about what's impacting in their business. And you can do it from a very empathetic way. You're checking in with them, see where you can help, where their challenges are, but this allows you to have your ear to the ground that some of the changes that are starting to perhaps happen in your ecosystem, in your industry, in your sector, and you can start to, we'll talk about a few more of those in some of the subsequent slides. Justine just touched on the next one. You need to reconcile the various government programs. This has been just, we have team members spending time on this every day because there's new announcements over the last few weeks. Some of the announcements are a high-level announcement followed by the devil of the details that follow in the subsequent days. There's obviously tons of debt instruments that have been put out there. Debt obviously is a tricky one for business owners. When your revenue shuts off, you're reluctant to take on debt, but there's also a number of different wage subsidies of different forms that have come out that are not debt, that allow you to potentially keep some of your team members on without bearing the cost of it. Beyond that, everything's up for negotiation. And what I mean by that is, you might have a lease, you might have a set contract, but no one's getting evicted right now, either from a business or from a home. Everyone understands that the contracts that were put in place with your suppliers, with your partners, with your landlords, they were done under a different circumstance, and it doesn't remove you from the contractual obligations you have. But if you are open and upfront with landlords and partners, everything's open. Talk to them about the fact that you need to defer, that you can't pay your rent. Talk to your suppliers about issues they might be having. You might have customers who are going to be reaching out to you, not able to pay for some of their bills. Just be open with people, so if you're not able to pay something, make sure they know that it's coming, and make sure you're having those conversations. Then you need to run your scenarios. So, there's uncertainty of when we're getting back to normal. What does July look like? What does September look like? No one knows that right now. So you need to run multiple scenarios, and then you need to cut quickly. All right. So no matter running those scenarios, many of you business owners, they understand that their revenue's down and going to be impacted at least short term and perhaps longer, and that some cuts are necessary. It doesn't necessarily mean staff. It might be other discretionary line items, but that's absolutely something you need to do quicker, and you need to be pretty, those who hesitate on this one are going to cost themselves a lot of time in the long run in terms of shortening your runway. Okay, so that's survival. So you sort of figured out how to get through the next few months. Now, what do you do? Well, we like to tell some of our companies time to go on offense here a little bit. A lot of the people out there that previously you couldn't get a hold of, those customers, those partners, those suppliers, they're surprisingly available. Right? You're able to reach out and connect with some people that you would not have been able to connect with, and you're able to create new partnerships potentially that you weren't able to do in past, because right now everyone's not looking to do everything in-house. They're looking for partners, and they're certainly going to be looking at that in the months ahead. Similarly, you might have had trouble hiring people. Now's the time to go out there and get talent. Okay, like those top salespeople, those top frontline customer service developers, product developers, whatever it is. It was hard to hire people 3 months ago. 3 months from now, it's going to be much easier, and you'll be able to get some amazing talent, whereas before you might not have been able to. And it's a time to grab market share. So, the competition is weakened just by you. The old adage that, when a bear is chasing you, you don't have to run faster than the bear. You just have to run faster than the people that are with you. Same goes with market. If there's 15 restaurants in my neighborhood right now, and there's only 7 around in 3 months that are open, when everyone comes back online and there's this pent-up demand to go out for dinner, some of those restaurants might be busier than they have ever been, notwithstanding some of the social limitations that have been around it. So it gives you an idea of just sort of rudimentary example. Think about new complementary services and offerings, right? It can be something as simple as how you're billing your employee, or billing, how you're doing billing, or how you're reconciling, or how you're onboarding and using video now to train, perhaps some of your customers or partners. Next, focus on profit. This one goes without saying, but there are a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that have various service types, and that they haven't actually done an analysis of what line items are actually more profitable. Now's the time to take a closer look at what are your profitable lines of business, because that's a lot more important now. Profit's a lot more important on a project by project, or a service by service, or an engagement by engagement basis than perhaps previously, where you worried more about your top line revenue. And then finally, focus on relationships, how you react, how you treat your staff, how you treat your customers, how you treat your suppliers, how you behave right now is going to be remembered more than it was in other times. This is a time to shine. This is a time to deepen the relationships you have, time to create great new relationships and create goodwill across the board. And at times dip into perhaps some goodwill that hopefully you've created previously within your business. So that's a medium stage, and then moving to, the strategy, and this is really more the long term, being ready for the other side. So first, have an open mindset. Some people might be familiar with the idea of an open or closed mindset. One way to look at this is to think about starting a brand new business today using the assets that you have. And those assets are certain expertise, staff, certain product inventory, customers, supply lines. Those are things that you have, but you're getting into a completely new form of business potentially. And you need to now sort of take a whole SWOT analysis of where you are at and what you bring to the table in sort of a new economy that might emerge on the other side. For some industries, it might go back to 70, 80, 90% of what it was, but some of them might be substantially different, and no one's quite sure yet right now. And just reassess at least a portion of your business. It might be the way you bill in customers. It might be the way you onboard them. You're using video now. You're using remote tools. There's a lot of things happening. There has to be at least a portion of your business, that those restaurants that are dreading, that the fact that they didn't have their own commerce tool to be able to deliver things to their customers are now forced to give away 30% to skip the dishes or Uber Eats, or one example that some restaurants are way ahead of others right now in terms of their ability to deliver directly to their customers. And then, finally, you need to adapt to the market shifts. So all of us right now are getting a little bit more used to convenience and this delivery mentality, things being brought to our doors, contracts being signed, all this type of things. And we're going to come out on the other side of this with that mindset a little bit more deeply ingrained. Same with digital tools. All of us are doing a workshop right now on Teams. We're doing this seminar on Teams where we would have done it in person. You're going to see more of these things happen either as a hybrid or purely digital, going forward. And then supply chains, you're seeing a lot more focus on the sort of hyper local supply chain versus, obviously China being one example, but all over the globe, there are going to be some challenges with that, at least in the medium term. And I think that a lot of people have realized the risk of being reliant on some international supply chains. So that's just a quick run through of the three sort of timelines that we're dealing with a lot of the entrepreneurs and customers and companies we deal with. And here's a quick email with a whole bunch of different resources that includes links to government resources and a whole bunch of best practices that we've got built through that link. So I'll pass it back on to the next person, and happy to take questions either through chat or live a little later on.
Thank you, Nick. Really good overview and really great food for thought to generate some good conversation. So now perhaps Dr. Jaskiewicz, maybe you can give us your perspective on what are the things we need to be thinking about in this critical time. Dr. Jaskiewicz?
Thank you. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you. We can hear you, Dr. Jaskiewicz.
Perfect. And Nick, thanks a lot also for your presentation. I think I'll be building up on your presentation, and I look forward later on also to the questions that I might be receiving from you and from the audience. So let's get started right away. There's a small lag with the progress of the slides. Perfect. So I'll be basically covering two major points, which are how successful family business owners can weather the storm and how they should be better able to rebound thereafter. And more specifically, I'll be talking about 3 points, and I base my points on actually evidence-based research with business owners that I've conducted during the financial crisis and following the 2008 crisis, 2008 to 2010, and based on discussions with a number of business owners over the last weeks, both here in Canada, in the US, and in Europe. And the first thing that I've observed is both back and following the 2008 crisis, now more recently, is that many of them accelerate their learning, right? It is just very important to understand what is going on. And that's exactly the first thing that they're asking. They're trying to put it into perspective, and they're trying to compare it to something that's happened to them before. And I can tell you that most of them have told me they have never experienced such a crisis before. So it's something that's unprecedented, right? And so they reach out to their family, colleagues, and competitors to then find out maybe reference points and practices what to do. But then I also realized that some of them have been better able to frame what is happening and see how to cope with it. First of all, I noted that several business owners I talked to had experiences from either because they had operations abroad or because they knew people For instance, I had to deal with a company that was involved in tourism in Pakistan. They told me a while ago, it was part of a research project, what they did after 9/11, and they were leading people into the mountains for tours back then. And the experiences they made back then, where they literally lost 100% of the business within days following 9/11. Similarly, there's many examples, thinking more geographically proximate to where we are, of what happened to businesses in New York. Think about the startups scene following 9/11. However, when working with European businesses, especially very old and multi-generational businesses, when, for example, they were hit by the 2008 crisis, many of them put it into context by thinking about what they heard from their parents, grandparents, and other family members, how they survived the Great Depression, hyperinflation, even invasion by other countries in the 19th or 18th century. And the takeaway for them was, if others were able to survive that, and they did this and this, we'll be able to survive the current crisis. So in summary, all of they basically asked, how have major crises affected other business owners and businesses, and what have they done about it? And that is for them a starting point for their learning. Moving on, and based on that first step, these business owners are charting their course through the current crisis. And the main point here is, and Nick, I think it's very complementary to what you have said, is retain your ability to compete in a very different, unprecedented time. And here there's a few things that I would like to elaborate on. So first of all, think about time kind of a house, and think about the foundation of the house being your liquidity, right? And that means you have to spend less, and you need to have access to financing to achieve more money. Without that, you will be out of business. The second thing, based on that foundation, right, and based on the information that you've gathered, you can build the walls, and that is talk to your key customers and your employees, right? Reassure them, talk to them, try to understand their needs and what is happening, because you're all sitting together, right, in the same boat, weathering the storm as it is out there. And then based on that, right, build a roof on that. And that is to some extent reprioritize your strategic projects. Having talked over the last weeks to several business owners, both in North America and Europe, I've realized that yes, many of them are postponing projects, they're cutting here and there, but I also have to admit I've talked to several business owners who have accelerated projects. And the main point is here for them is, how can we protect and strengthen our competitive edge, right? And what do we have to do right now to survive? A very easy example for small businesses, if you have a brick and mortar bookstore, right, you won't be having any business right now, right? If you have the possibility to have an online shop, right, that might be a small way to pivot. But then it's also the question that follows, not only what do I have to do now during the crisis, but what do I have to do to rebound and come more strongly out of the crisis, right? And this is basically, how can I hone my competitive edge, considering a different world that will be out there, right? And here the point is, the main point is, how can you improve your ability to make a sustained difference in the new market and environment that will be out there? And once again, I have a few points I would like to stress here. First, the first point I would like to make is, obviously, what is your value added? What is your edge? What is your competitive edge, and how will it matter? I think we've already heard a few examples over the last 20 minutes, right? How will more work from the home office? How will, an even higher percentage of online sales? How will more national rather than global procurement, for example, for medical devices or safety gear, right, impact you? And what about individuals caring now more about healthcare spending? So these are just societal shifts that will have a major impact on a lot of businesses. And I think a lot of business owners I talked to already think about it very clearly. But then I also realized, and it's very, very, very clear that many of them are rethinking how they are, especially the medium-sized and larger ones, how they are actually managing themselves in the crisis. So basically, you're weathering the storm on your boat, right? But how exactly is the interaction on that boat going on, right? And the question they're asking is, based on the current experience, are we getting the information that we are needing, right? Are we having the right decision-making processes? Are we able to react quickly, right? And I've talked to some business owners who said, well, look, we have healthcare professionals on our board. They talk to us very early about the dangers that are coming out that are coming, and that was very helpful to have these external board members. I've talked to others who said we have advisors who work with clients around the world and brought us very early on information about what's going on in China. I've had people talking about customers at trade fairs and saying, well, they were not sure whether the next one would take place because they've had their first issues with suppliers from China and so on. So they were able to access better information, have access to people who had information, right? And that helped them make decision. And similarly, right, some of them were thinking now not only about how to change decision-making process, but also how to train their own personnel to be better able to maybe, analyze data, get information, make better decisions. Following that, now we're turning to my next point. It is not only how you revise your decision-making processes, but what I realized is, as the crisis will be coming closer to an end, and people will be thinking about, the storm is over, the sunshine will be slowly coming out. I mean, this is also the time when you should prepare for the next storm, right? Because the waters will be calmer, and the point is now for the established businesses, which of your contingency plans, were useful, which parts of them were not useful, how do you have to improve them, revise them? And for a lot of newer businesses, well, it's time to establish a contingency plan, right? And think about how your team can be prepared for the next crisis so they're ready once the dark clouds show up again, right? So who has the effective skills in your team, in your business, right, to develop an effective contingency plan? Who will implement it, right? And what data should you observe, right, now and later on during the crisis to be better able to make, good decisions and weather the next storm better? So this basically can be summarized in answering the following question: what do you have to do to rebound more successfully after the storm and be ready for the next one? And it's, in summary, taken together, right? First of all, people try to accelerate the learning in the following, right? They think about how to chart their course through the stormy waves that are out there. And finally, they think about, right, what has worked well during the crisis, right? How to set up the course now for the better weather, and how to get ready for the next crisis. And with that being said, I would also like to highlight here a link that I actually published yesterday, a list of more than 20 videos of family business advisors, faculty members, and community members on common problems of business owners around the world and how to address them. The resources are free there and hopefully will empower business owners around the world to better navigate the current crisis and the challenges they're facing. With that being said, thank you, and I'm happy to pass the baton, so to speak, back to Justine.
Thank you, Professor Jaskiewicz and Nick, for I think what gives us certainly a good starting point and overview. And as you mentioned, Dr. Jaskiewicz, we can see some of the common themes, or how the perspective from the entrepreneur and some good value-added research that you've conducted over the years, how not only they complement each other, but really support in terms of some of the theory that might be out there, but the benefits you can get from a practice point of view. So with that, I think we've been collecting a few questions along the way. So again, we wanted to keep the overviews and the perspectives as concise as possible to really be able to generate as much dialogue as possible. So if I may, Dr. Jaskiewicz, I'll direct my question to you first. Which is, you mentioned that some companies have accelerated their projects. Have you seen a correlation with the sector they operate in?
So I have to admit, I've seen actually quite detailed plans of a very large international corporation. And the point there was that they said, basically went out to the customers and said, what are you really valuing about what we are doing? And they said, these are the things on which we have to invest more. And in that particular case, another case that I have seen, they, for example, said that they have to send, some people will be working fewer hours and less. They actually said their R&D team, for example, will be working full time, and they'll be actually asked to maybe even work additional time, because they see it now as a possibility to basically be ready to gain more market share once the crisis is over, and to accelerate the development of products and test them, right? Because they have resources from other parts of the business that are idle right now, and they want to take advantage of that.
Great, Dr. Jaskiewicz, thank you for that. Maybe Nick, I'll send this question over to you. It goes as such. It says, in startups and entrepreneurial firms, staff are very close and committed to the company, perhaps even more so in a family business. When faced with a crisis like COVID or a challenging financial situation, how do you suggest involving staff in decision making to maintain commitment to the future of the company, particularly when faced with the uncertainty of layoffs, reduced hours, wage cuts, and so forth? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, I think that whether it's a family business or whether it's an early stage startup entrepreneurial firm, they often are like a family business, right? They're like family. They're spending tons of time together. I mean, you can't hide from these things. So the truth will set you free. I think that you need to have authentic conversations with them if you're considering things like cutting their salary, like dropping the number of days, or perhaps layoffs from the team. I would come up with a plan on how to position that with them. I wouldn't just sort of have that conversation randomly, but I would err on the side of being open with them on that, especially if these are A players that you want to have as part of your organization, and the layoff might be temporary. I know many companies that have let go some people they didn't want to let go, and they fully intend to hire them back. But there's great government programs right now that are there as a safety net for some of these staff to be able to take on, to be able to pay their bills. And the intent is to bring those team members back. So I would, if you're a team of 15, you might have a conversation with your 2 or 3 main people first to sort of come up with a plan on it before you involve the rest of the company. The only other thing I'll answer on that is I have seen, I think one of the challenges for business owners is they hire fast and they fire slow, when really it should be the opposite as you become better at your job. Certainly it's something I've gotten better at over the years. And many business owners have used this as an opportunity to cull their organization of people that perhaps weren't in the best position, but they had just been reluctant or too busy to, contemplate replacing them. So we've certainly seen some companies, I wouldn't say take advantage, but use this opportunity to lay off some staff, partially because of revenue, but also to identify, these are the 8 people I want to keep, and these are the 3 that aren't really well suited for our company long term. So we're seeing some of that as well. Peter, I'm not sure if there's something you want to add there.
I think you did very well. I don't have much to add. I believe family firms and startups are very similar, but I believe they're all, very much rooted in their communities. And it's very hard because they know that what they're doing will have a direct impact on people who live in the same community. We've had a business owner once say, I cannot fire people because otherwise my children will be beaten up at daycare. The baker won't sell me bread and the priest won't let me into the church.
And maybe I can just offer a comment there. I know we've received a lot of outreach at EDC, some of our own suppliers, I guess even from some of the Telfer community students as such, looking to see if they can offer some assistance. And I'm not ashamed to say that in some instances we have leveraged that capability. So it's kind of interesting to see in times like this how you can adapt. And certainly we've been looking to see how we can decentralize some of the decision making, particularly as we've been trying to streamline a lot of our processes to be able to give access to liquidity. And we know that speed of execution is so important in these times. So we've been trying to really fulfill that and getting everybody involved. So maybe I can take us a little bit to the sunnier days, I think, as Peter talked about. And maybe I'll go to you, Peter, first, and then Nick to get your perspective. So when we all love to talk about the other side, and I'm hopeful that even despite the snow this morning, the sun will be shining upon us much sooner than we believe. So if we think of after the crisis, or as the crisis evolves and hopefully comes to a close, for sure things will be different, right? I think how companies operate every day, it's been impressive to see, how technology's kind of played such a big role in keeping people connected. What do you see as opportunities for Canada in the new normal, like in terms of whether it be in terms of markets, or maybe even a perspective on a sector or two where you think we could have a real advantage? Nick, do you want to, or Peter?
I'm happy to get started, but Nick, if you want to start, I'm happy also to. Well,
No, go ahead.
okay, I'll just get started. Well, we are in the capital region, so the government plays a major role here. We're just seeing the supply chain issues that we're facing because of medical equipment that is, to a large extent, for example, produced currently in China. I believe that a lot of national procurement will be the new normal for important goods. So I believe there'll be many opportunities to pitch to the government, production of what they consider important, for example, for the healthcare sector in Canada. And a lot of entrepreneurs that might have lost in the past opportunities against competitors from abroad might now have an opportunity, as we pay more attention to the possibility to get access to critical goods and very quickly, and be less dependent on other countries.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, I mean, Ottawa in particular, I mean, it has the highest density of high-tech workers in North America, right? And we have incredible talent here. We have the highest percentage of engineers. And then, for Ottawa in particular, you look at our leading employer, obviously being the federal government. Those people aren't about to get laid off, nor the other major private sector employers such as Ericsson. I mean, Nokia, BlackBerry. These are huge. It's still huge industries, let alone someone like Shopify, who's just going through a whole boom here. So I think that our local talent pool is amazing, and the main employers are going to be very steady, and that trickles down really nicely. I think in a grander question, looking at the federal government all of a sudden forced to adopt digital tools, work from home, collaborate, that opens up all sorts of opportunities locally for different organizations to support that transition that's now been accelerated. And I think other things like health tech in Canada, life sciences are still very strong, and obviously that they're going to see all sorts of acceleration in and extra investment put into that industry. And similarly, cybersecurity, it's a huge one. And the cyber bandits are out in force, right? So many people out there. They're coming hot and heavier than ever, which puts the need for cybersecurity even greater. And I actually think, just at a big macro level, our approach to immigration and bringing in talent, I think Canada's in a really good position to bring in even more incredibly talented people as new Canadians into this country over the next decade, that maybe we're in a better position than other countries in that regard, and we'll have a different perspective, certainly versus our southern neighbors on bringing in new talent.
Thanks for that, Nick. It's always fascinating to me how in times like this, how sometimes innovation can be sparked in different ways. And on the healthcare front, certainly I'm aware of a consortium out of Montreal that launched a competition to try to see if they could reduce the unit price of ventilating machines, obviously for the healthcare sector. And within a week or two, got some support from a sponsorship point of view, have 2 winning bids, and now we'll be looking for the right way to market it and to manufacture it. And with a view that recognizing that COVID is going to hit some of the Southern Hemisphere and the African continent, that it can end up being a real solution. And that was all home based in Canada. So just an example for folks in terms of how we can leverage time like this, and how some of our industries that we're well renowned for from our innovation point of view can be put to good use in this time of crisis. I guess question for both Nick and Professor Jaskiewicz, in terms of what you've observed so far with how I would say governments, both like at the federal level, at the provincial level, have come together in terms of offering solutions, would welcome your views on are they the right solutions? And is there still a gap that remains out there that is required at this time? Maybe Nick, I can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a moving target, right? We've had, the first initial of the wage subsidy, for instance, the test on it was year over year, which is incredibly problematic for certain businesses that are either going through rapid growth or that were pre-revenue a year ago. It didn't help them at all, in particular in the tech space. And the government's, iterating faster, the unprecedented, like how quickly the government is actually moving. It's been amazing to see. I think our government versus the US, has been a little bit more trying to come up with specific programs for those that are in need versus the US has done a bit of a blanket simple program. I think that I actually in some ways prefer the Canadian program. I think that there'll be some that are missed and lost in trying to define it, but I think providing wage subsidies or other benefits to companies that are all of a sudden revenues have doubled because of the COVID-19 and health tech kind of thing doesn't make sense either. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't with some of these policies, and the government's trying to do their best impact without doing too much harm. But overall, I've been quite pleased. I think we've seen now. I think in the last week we're probably not quite done, but I think the government's programs to date have been around survival. Right, so they're short-term stuff. They're like wage subsidies for the next 90 days. They help you in April and May. I think what we'll see beyond this, which is the next stage, are other types of longer-term stimulus that will help business and entrepreneurship. What that looks like, I don't think the government's figured out. I don't think anyone's quite figured out what it should look like, because it's a mess right now. None of us have visibility into how much carnage is going to be happening within different sectors and within different industries, or how quickly the ramp up is this going to be a V? Is it going to be a W? Is it going to be what's the look of this sort of curve economically? I think that there's time to put that in place, but I think overall government's been pretty amazing in responding. I don't say that a lot. They've been pretty amazing in responding so quickly.
Thanks, Nick. And for the record, we did record you, so I may take that back and share it with some of my colleagues. Dr. Jaskiewicz, what's your perspective on what's been made available out there?
Well, first of all, I think you already, Justine, provided us a really good presentation of how quickly the government has reacted, and that support is flowing out there to where it is needed, right? And it was great to see. And in your part of the presentation, to build upon what Nick has said, I would like to add a few things. I believe, because it is an unprecedented crisis, it's not like that we have the medicine that we can use, right, to fix the situation. It is a moving target. We need to show adaptability. On a positive note, I think we're also learning from the good and bad things that other countries that were hit a few weeks earlier than us, what is working, what is not, right? And I think that we can see here that there's a learning that we are maybe a bit more fine-tuned than some of the reactions of European countries or Asian countries that didn't have any data. And as we are collecting data from what is happening over there and what is happening here, will also over time be better able, the government will be better able to provide even more fine-tuned measures. At the same time, I believe there will be other crises coming up that are related to it, because everything is interconnected. And even if we are able to implement here policies and come up with solutions, we are all in a pretty much global networked economy. Right. So even if things happen in other countries, they will have repercussions for us on our markets, on supply chains, on prices of goods. And I believe that, we're living in interesting times, and it will continue for a while.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And, if I can share a bit of a personal story on this, certainly when we were pulling together the BCAP guarantee, I remember getting a call on Sunday morning at 10 from my boss, and he basically said, Justine, we need something, and we need fast. So, within the next week and a half, we created this product. And when Nick talks about how the government has been adjusting, after we shared it with our banking partners, literally 24 hours later, I got wind that we needed to amend the program. So I'd be dishonest if I didn't tell you I was a little bit frustrated, because obviously we were concerned about the impact of the communication. But in my 20 years having been at EDC, efficiency and working in partnership. I've never seen so much decision making and adjustment. And I'd like to think that it's a sign of resiliency and agility. And it's really aimed to be able to provide what's needed for now. And what you both mentioned really resonates with me in terms of right now, it is definitely about this, offering what is available to survive. And we're starting to see some of the conversations turn into, the medium term, which I think becomes important, so that I would expect that some of these government programs, or new ones, quite frankly, will start to emerge, to your earlier point. Maybe another more general question. It's about how do you feel the confidence level of businesses to actually leverage what is available to them? An interesting question came in around a recent survey of small businesses from Southeast Ontario. And I guess for one was revealing to a couple of interesting facts. One, that probably very few will actually face bankruptcy. But the second statistic is about 60% don't really intend on applying for government help. And the main reason for that, they feel that it's quite confusing. And perhaps it's a little bit too much of a zoo to figure it out. I guess, Dr. Jaskiewicz, you have any reactions to that?
So I believe it's a common problem in many jurisdictions, not only in Canada, that business owners sometimes believe that government programs can be a bit difficult or a bit bureaucratic to access. I've already had years ago, while working in Alberta, I was working with the federal government to shed some data to ease the pain, because there were programs out there, but businesses didn't know exactly how to navigate the web page. So I believe as these programs are new, and therefore the new web pages and new systems and forms are developed, right, there's also learning that has to take place how to navigate that, right? If a program has been around for 30 years, a lot of business owners will simply be used to applying for money or taking advantage of it. But if there's new things out there, it's not only about creating these forms, but also explaining it to people and showing them how to use it. And I believe this is just a big effort that just takes time, right? And I believe that the government and including you, Justine, you're doing what you can. And I mean, there's just some patience and a bit of learning involved. Like, we all have to be adaptable these days, right? And try to do what we can to get through this.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Jaskiewicz. And maybe to add an observation or share with our fellow alumni, I've certainly seen, we've been, 5 or 6 weeks into this. The first few weeks were very much about creation, right? Like creating the solutions that were needed to make them available. And I must say that I've noticed in the past couple of weeks, and hopefully the community will start to notice it as well, where, law firms, accounting firms, the banks, universities have been able to actually consolidate a lot of information to demystify the various programs. And I would certainly encourage anybody on this webinar to reach out to some of those organizations or your fellow associations, as I believe many of them have been able to put together, I guess, the latest information, which hopefully helps you triage in terms of what the needs are of your particular business and what you may need out there, and most importantly, how to access it. I think we have time for probably one or two more questions, and maybe one for Nick. When you were talking about, kind of your strategy, and you mentioned, running different scenarios. Like, how many scenarios should one business consider? And is there a risk of analysis paralysis, especially today, because things are changing so fast?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are basic scenarios. So for instance, you might have a scenario that says, okay, I think we're going to be 80% back to normal July 1st. Another say it might be we're 80% back to normal September, October 1st, and another one's January 1st. And then you take a look at what those revenue thresholds are. And you can do this on one sheet of paper. You don't need, or you can do it in Excel, but you can do this in a pretty simple format relative to your costs and do a bit of a cash flow analysis of this. And then sort of work your way back. So you have 3 models of where cuts have to occur and when. So as you move into May and realize that July 1st, 80% back to normal isn't happening, you can quickly look at that other scenario and say, okay, what were the other cuts that I was going to have to do to survive to September, either staff or whatever it might be, or what are the other revenue generating opportunities I need to accelerate now in order to get to that, in order to keep the scenario in terms of my costs. I mean, it's one or the other, right? You're either figuring out ways to cut costs, or you're figuring out ways to bring additional revenue in, and you need to have a bunch of back pocket things that you can reach for to cut your costs. And so those are really the scenarios that I'm talking about. So as you move forward, you come up with your sort of loose straw man of 3 different scenarios, and then each of them have their different cut strategies of what you have to cut and some considerations of whom. You don't have to go too deep, and then you react. Then you've got a little bit. You start to feel a little bit more comfort as a business owner, because the uncertainty now is overwhelming for so many business owners to even wrap their head around. There's never been so much and uncertainty around the future of your revenue stream, because the business environment is unknown. We just don't know whether I'm going to be able to go here, or customers are going to be able to come meet me here, or I'm going to be able to see them in person. So now more than ever, we need some different scenarios. And I think this is an important part of what the Ontario government and others have to start to do, to lay out these plans for what the anticipated plan is on the next phase of sort of socialization, so that business owners can start to plan. Like, how do you, as a restaurant is an extreme example, or if you run a travel agency, or you run a live event business, like obviously many of those are looking into the abyss right now, but what are the different scenarios? Like, they need to know sooner rather than later of what's going to happen to the restaurant industry. Are they going to cut their, the allowed people in the restaurant in half? And that will be an intermediate step for maybe 3 months, so that restaurant owners understand, okay, I'm going to have half as many people. So maybe there's a different way to maximize my revenue with people a little bit more who are in the building. I'm not sure. They got to start thinking, but right now it's very difficult for them. So those are the types of scenarios I'm talking about. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it certainly does, Nick. A question we received, interesting one, was around EDC's FinDev Canada division, and whether or not what we were doing in terms of support provided to companies that are actually operating in emerging markets, and what is FinDev Canada doing these days. So interesting question. Certainly our FinDev Canada colleagues have been very close to the EDC family. To be frank with you right now, I mean, the development agenda in Canada is a little bit on ice. Having said that, FinDev is working quite in partnership in terms of if you look at some of the emerging markets that have not yet been hit or at the same level that we are here in Canada with COVID. So similarly, if you think of some of the programs that have come out in Canada, FinDev Canada is looking to see how we can help support similar efforts in emerging markets, and certainly seeing what role Canada can play there. So I would share with you that they're perhaps a month to 6 weeks behind us, but it's something that we're following really closely. So we'll have some more news on that in the coming weeks. I guess our time is soon coming to a close, and maybe as we round up the last question for Dr. Jaskiewicz and Nick, a question that came in, I think was one of the first ones, but I've kept for last, is I'd really love to hear from you, your perspective on what's your confidence level in the ability of the Canadian economy to rebound from this. Dr. Jaskiewicz, why don't I start with you?
So, well, I think it's a difficult question, because I think actually Nick already mentioned it before. We don't know yet exactly how much the economy will be opening, when, and whether it will be a second or third wave of coming with of COVID-19. So it's very hard to predict at this point of time. But I believe there's some confidence when you look to markets both in Asia and Europe that are reopening, that there's a lot of consumers and organizations that are picking up where they left behind, hoping that they'll be able to get back to where they were. I don't think we will be very quickly back to where we used to be, but at least we can see that life resumes, and there is a lot of there's also a lot of optimism that, you know, the lockdown is over in some other places, and so there is a rebounding happening. So I believe we might not end up with an L shape and a development where we'd be very much for a long time in a more depressed economic state. But I believe there'll be some optimism coming forward, and we'll see a resurgence. How quickly that will happen, I don't know, but I'd be cautiously optimistic.
Nick, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very optimistic about Ottawa in general relative to other markets, and I'm very optimistic a year to a year and a half from now that we'll come through this actually with all sorts of innovation that's happened. That on the other side will in some areas be in a better place. I am very concerned about the next year. I am very concerned about September and October still. Knowing that vaccines, are not going to be in place by that time, and that even wide scale testing, I think that there's still going to be commercial limitations on us, on businesses, and on us still socially in some ways as a populace, and in turn that will still have a lingering impact that will, I don't think things will be back to normal in August or September. So I think it'll be better than now, but I do think that planning for those scenarios where it's a bit of a more phased back to normal, or whatever the new normal is a year from now, that business owners do have to sort of dig in for a bit more of a longer haul.
Thanks, Nick and Dr. Jaskiewicz. I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, I go back to some of the earlier conversation about how this crisis is so unprecedented and quite frankly unpredictable at times. It's been very challenging for all of us to manage. On a positive note, it's been a nice reaction and surprise to see the resiliency that's coming out of this, and certainly agility in terms of speed of execution, which I think are going to be two attributes that are going to be in great demand for a business of any size as we weather this storm and get ready for the next phase. So with that, Quain, I think it's my turn to hand the mic over back to you. And before I do so, I certainly want to thank Dr. Jaskiewicz and Nick for taking the time, and all the alumni that have joined in, and for Telfer for pulling this together. But Quain, le mot de la fin is yours.
Okay. Merci. Thank you, Justine, and thanks again, Peter and Nick. Just a couple of very quick points. First, keep an eye out for the post-event survey that you'll be receiving later today. We'd appreciate your feedback and comments on today's webinar. Secondly, you'll get the recording and presentation in the following days. And then I just wanted to mention again, as this is part of a series of Telfer forums, our next one will be on May 6th around workplace mental health. So when your workplace becomes your home, experts will share evidence-based and practical insights on challenges that employees face on the home front in the context of this crisis, including mental health, work-life balance, and virtual team dynamics. So another exciting and interesting webinar coming up on May 6th. So keep an eye out for that, and you'll get some more information shortly. So with that, we will wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you for the comments and questions in the chat. And again, for our panelists, everyone please stay safe, stay healthy, and looking forward to getting through this together. So thank you very much, everyone.